Hey guys, Lonelywolf here, and I am bringing you guys some what I believe to be exciting news about The Long Dark and its development. You may be asking, why is The Long Dark still developing even after it's been released from early access? And that's because Hinterland is actually a decent studio that delivers a game and then keeps delivering. A lot of you are heavily invested in survival mode, and a lot of you are heavily invested in Wintermute or story mode. And some of you are invested into both, and I hope to be able to give you guys some news with this to hopefully alleviate some of your stress of thinking, when's the next update coming out, or what's coming up with the story mode. So we'll get on to the most important news first, or probably the most critical news first, surrounding Episode 3. Now, if you recall, in August of 2017, we got Episodes 1 and 2 of Wintermute. And early in 2018, they started work on Episode 3, and that's when a lot of the criticisms and complaints about the first two episodes came up, primarily that the narrative structure of the episodes was good, or at least in terms of the way the story played out, but that it was rather fetch questy and lacked delivery and continuity. And so after they began work on Episode 3, Raphael made the executive decision to can it for the time being and work on a few things to benefit the entirety of the future of The Long Dark, which was some tech and pipeline improvements to overall content creation, region creation, objective-based delivery of the game, considering the entire rest of the development of the game has been in Sandbox before that point, etc. So that's what they used to finish up through the rest of the year, keeping in mind Hinterland is not the size of EA or CD Projekt Red or Blizzard. They have a very limited amount of people to work on things. That was one of the lessons they learned after the first two episodes, was having a lot of space in the game and then not being able to keep the continuity together to have the game feel like it's too large, like you're backtracking all over the place. And so working on the Redux to get a fresh perspective on balancing all that was something they worked on a lot. And it also gave them an idea of what the ideal length for an episode should be, which is, in their terms, about 5 to 7 hours. The reasoning behind that is that it gives them time to present players with interesting story threads, some open world survival gameplay, and the momentum to keep the story moving. Keeps the episodic content feeling substantial, but it also leaves it open enough that you don't have to spend weeks of your time working on it. Here, the details we have so far is that Episode 3 has no official launch date yet, which is to be expected. Hinterland, being a small team, has their own internal goals and have dedicated themselves to certain I guess you could call it public deadlines in the past that they've been unable to keep, either due to creative overstepping, where they've bit off more than they can chew, or technical difficulties that have arisen in the content pipeline. Therefore, they have no official release date yet for Episode 3. However, he's said that they've made a lot of progress on it. We should expect more news of it in the near future, which I would say within a month or two. Probably even release in a month or two, or perhaps in time for summer. Anyway, Episode 3 is going to be taking place in the footsteps of Astrid now instead of Will Mackenzie. And it's going to be her survival story after escaping from Milton. And the entirety of it's going to be taking place in Pleasant Valley. So there's a lot of scope for environments and story moments, and they're actually working on refreshing the region of Pleasant Valley to prepare it for this new story, and adding some new landmarks and locations, which will pan over into Sandbox mode as well, which I think is really exciting, because with the additions made in story, or from Episodes 1 and 2 to the Sandbox in terms of regions and content, and then the additions and changes to those regions that came with Redux were very pleasant and added some more continuity and explorability and exciting things in those regions. So I'm very interested in seeing what this has, both in terms of an Episode 3 ramifications and also for Sandbox. I touched on it before, but Raphael has said that with such a small team and game studio development not being an exact science, they work really hard to work their goals. Raphael is not going to be the next Stalin. He's not going to crush his team to reach for whatever reason, unreachable dates and goals for the community. So he's not going to be offering any more public release dates until they are absolutely ready to ship. So let's say they finally finished all production and they've decided on a ship date. That's when we'll get some news. I touched on this in, I think, the past 2 videos of mine, but now they're really pushing towards and are very close to focus on it in a couple of months' time, is having enough people to create 2 separate teams, one to focus purely on survival mode and one to focus on story. And the reason they want to do this is that they want to bifurcate their teams like that so that they can have meaningful productions and content for both modes happening at the same time, rather than a tick-tock cadence of story, sandbox, story, sandbox, story, sandbox. They want to be able to deliver meaningful, larger updates of sandbox and story, sandbox and story. So to going from a tick-tock, tick-tock to a talk, 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 talk. I think that's a great thing, and they're not quite there yet, but they're getting there. And the nice thing about having a team that large is they'll actually be able to move people from working to assist with a huge problem or to produce a much larger function of content from one team to the other at crunch times to make sure. And now comes the exciting part. They've got a bunch of new features and content in the pipeline for 2019 Sandbox or survival mode releases. Again, they're not sharing any release dates for them, but they've already done, as far as he said, a fair bit of work on the new systems and content that will comprise the core of the new, and I feel is my best highlight to this, free update. Again, we don't know when this is coming, but we do know some of the content that is coming. They're going to be adding the revolver to survival mode. I'm interested to see how this gun works and how it'll be useful. This has, I think, been kind of an undertone of the community for a while. It's not really risen to the fore because it's just been annoying but dealable with. They're overhauling the aiming mechanics for the rifle and the bow, etc. So for all of us who have finally gotten used to the new and improved aiming mechanics, we're gonna have to get used to it again. I want to cry, but hey, that's how it goes. They're going to be adjusting the fatigue and breathing cycle, making aiming less frustrating and more consistent. They're going to be adding more food items, more clothing items, and I think this is probably the biggest one, fixing the spraying system. Hopefully, no longer will we be just walking on a flat surface or even just standing on a hill and all of a sudden lurching off to the side and being like, oh, my wrist. And sadly, this is some sad news, but the one feature that will not be in the next survival update is the bear spear. It's been far harder for Hinterland to be able to implement a consistent cycle of interaction with that between all the wildlife that exists. And it's far harder to add it into the core of survival mode compared to the scripted narrative element of Wintermute. They are going to be providing some updates and polishing to episode 2 to kind of fix some areas that made the whole encounter frustrating at a latter portion of episode 2. I'm not going to give any spoilers. Let's just say an interaction with the bear spear was becoming a bit of a contentious point in the community, and they're going to address that. They're also hard at work on a new survival region, but they claim that will most likely not be ready until the update after this survival mode update they're speaking of, which will be the next survival mode update. So if we were to call this update 1, that new region will be coming in update 2. So they'll also be doing a traditional update video on launch day, whenever this info comes out, whenever they actually do launch something, which will be incredibly beneficial. And I'm looking forward to that. Now, the last points they wanted to give us today is that they've got all that new equipment from their motion capture that they got from Capcom Vancouver's closed studio. They got that equipment and they're setting some stuff up in their current studio, but they have a lot of limited space, so they're only able to use 18 out of the 36 cameras they got. They're looking to short-term modify their space to allow for more usage of more cameras and get everything set up and flowing better. But they plan to eventually, at some point, be able to get into an area of using more of those cameras to fully implement a better motion capture studio for full implementation. They've got some news on the port to Nintendo Switch. As it stands right now, due to the hardware included in the Switch, it's rather lackluster compared to even the Xbox or the PlayStation 4. And so they do not have performance to a point where they believe it's acceptable on the Switch. But they're still working towards it. It's not been canned. They're still trying to identify where they can improve things or where they can cut some things to make it run better. And the next version of Unity, which they'll be rolling out as part of the next survival update, which will hopefully fix some of those scene hitches we've been having since the last one, offers a lot of performance improvements, which should also make both PC, Xbox, and PlayStation versions of the game run far better. But they just don't have it at an acceptable point yet for their standards. That's all the news in this update. I know it's probably not what you guys were hoping for. I'm sure a lot of you guys were hoping for direct news on episode 3, which is just sadly not the case yet beyond what they've given us. But it is still news that I believe goes in the right direction, and I think it's a bold move of them to say we've handled things poorly in the past, here's how we're going to handle them in the future. If I had to hedge my bets, reading what Raph has given us and knowing how their dev cycle has kind of worked out in the past with a smaller team, I would say we're definitely going to be getting story mode episode 3 this summer. I'm not going to pick a specific month. I was honestly hoping for far sooner than that, but it sounds like instead of just slowing down development on episode 3, they've completely canned work on episode 3 until the completion of Redux and the last survival mode update, which means that reproduction of episode 3 didn't start in earnest until, well, January, so they have not had a whole lot of time to fully prepare an entire episode. So I would say it'll probably be summer by the time we get that, but there's still good news all around. I hope this video was helpful. As always, if you enjoyed, maybe leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys in the next ones. Until then, as always, stay safe and stay warm out there.